I can still feel the weight of that moment pressing against my chest, like a stone I'll never fully set down. It happened in my own home, a place that once felt warm and safe, suddenly turned into a stage for betrayal. The people I had given my heart and years of sacrifice to looked at me not as family, but as a problem to be managed and an obstacle to be removed. That day, I learned what it feels like when trust shatters. It's not a loud crash, it's a quiet fracture. You don't hear glass breaking. You just feel something deep inside you splitting apart, never to be whole again. I stood frozen, unable to process that my own children could speak so casually about sending me away, as though I were a burden to be shelved, a piece of furniture taking up space. The air in the room felt heavier, each word they spoke cutting deeper, reminding me of how far we had drifted from love. There was no compassion in their eyes, only calculation. I realized, in that instant, that grief had blinded me. I had clung to the belief that family meant unconditional care, but they had been treating me like a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. I remember my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the rage I struggled to contain. It burned low and steady, a fire I hadn't felt in years. They thought they were dealing with someone fragile, someone too broken to fight back. They saw an aging parent, dependent and vulnerable. What they didn't see was the woman who had weathered storms they couldn't imagine, who had built a life from the ground up, who had fought for every ounce of stability they now took for granted. In that moment, I swallowed the hurt, let the betrayal sink deep into my bones, and made a silent vow they would never see me break. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my kindness for naivety. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly predict, was that I still had resources, strength, and a will sharper than any knife they were trying to twist into me. I smiled through the ache, not to forgive them, but to mask the storm building inside me. They thought they had won. They thought I was cornered. But they had no idea that I had already begun sketching the outlines of a plan that would remind them who I really was. Before I share how I did it, though, I need to tell you how I got here. Because betrayal doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows in the shadows of years of sacrifice, of giving pieces of yourself until there's barely anything left. And that's where my story truly begins. When I look back over the years, I sometimes wonder how I managed to carry so much on my shoulders. Life was never simple, but I embraced the struggles because I believed that's what love demanded. I spent decades putting my family first, raising children, working long hours, clipping coupons just to make ends meet, and setting aside my own wants so that my son and daughter could have every chance I never did. There were nights when I came home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. Yet I still stayed up to iron their school clothes or help them finish a science project. I packed lunches, sewed costumes, and drove endless miles to soccer practices and school concerts. I didn't think of it as sacrifice back then. It was just what mothers did. I wanted them to step into the world with confidence, never doubting that they were loved. When my husband passed, the world felt heavier than I thought I could bear. But even in my grief, I pushed forward because my children needed me steady. I sold our home, downsized, and stretched every dollar to keep them afloat in college. When they struggled with rent or bills, I quietly wrote checks. When they reached for bigger dreams, I dipped into my savings to help with down payments or tuition. I told myself it was an investment in their future, a way of ensuring that all my years of work meant something lasting. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. My giving became expected. The little words of thanks grew fewer, replaced by silence, as though my help were just part of the background automatic, invisible. Invitations to dinners turned into afterthoughts. Calls became less about how I was doing and more about what I could provide. I felt the distance widening, but I convinced myself it was just the busyness of adulthood, not a change in their hearts. Still, I couldn't ignore the subtle dismissals. The way my opinions were brushed aside. The way they made decisions as if I weren't even in the room. It stung, but I swallowed it because I loved them. Because I thought families worked through such things. What I didn't know then, what I was only beginning to sense in quiet, uneasy moments, was that this coldness wasn't only neglect. It wasn't only forgetfulness or the natural drift of years. No, there was something deeper at play, something intentional. And the day would come when I would see clearly what they had been planning behind my back all along. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Families go through seasons. I thought, sometimes they draw close, sometimes they drift apart, but the longer I paid attention, the harder it was to deny the truth. Small details began to surface, tiny cracks in the facade that revealed something far darker underneath. I noticed how conversations would pause when I entered a room. Papers would be tucked away, glances exchanged, voices lowered just enough to make me feel like an intruder in my own home. I would catch whispers about money, about property values, about timing. It wasn't the casual chatter of family planning for the future. It carried a sharpness, a secrecy that left me cold. The signs grew harder to ignore. One afternoon, I found a glossy brochure on the counter for a senior living facility. Smiling faces filled the pages, people playing cards, floating in a pool, taking art classes. It was packaged as luxury, but to me, it looked like exile. The strangest part, I had never asked for this. Never once said I wanted to leave my home. And yet, there it was, sitting openly as if my fate had already been decided. My heart sank when I overheard them one evening, their voices drifting down the hallway. They weren't talking about my well-being. They were calculating, adding up the worth of the house, speculating about what they could do once I was settled somewhere safe. They spoke as if I were a line item on a balance sheet, not the mother who had poured everything into giving them a life. That was the night the truth finally clicked into place. The dismissive tone, the sudden interest in my finances, the isolation from friends. It wasn't neglect. It was design. Piece by piece, they had been arranging things so that when the time came, I would have no choice. They wanted me tucked away, silenced and sidelined, while they took control of everything I had built. The weight of it pressed down on me like a vice. Anger welled up, hot and undeniable, but underneath it all, a new kind of clarity formed. They thought I was blind, that I would accept whatever story they spun. But they were wrong. I had seen enough, heard enough, to know exactly what game they were playing. And if they thought I would sit quietly and let it happen, they had underestimated me. That was the night I decided I would not be a victim in my own story. They had their agenda, but I had mine. And I was about to remind them that I still had more power than they realized. The night I finally faced the truth about their agenda, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding like a drum. The anger was sharp, but beneath it, something stronger stirred resolve. I realized I didn't need to wait for them to make the next move. I could take control before they ever saw it coming. I started with the one person I trusted outside the family, an old friend who had stood by me through life's hardest storms. Years ago, he had helped me settle my husband's estate, quietly. I reached out, my voice calm, though my insides trembled. By the next afternoon, I was sitting in his office, my purse heavy with the documents I had kept safe all these years. They had forgotten that I wasn't careless, that I had always been meticulous. Every deed, every account statement, every insurance policy, I had them all, tucked neatly away. As we reviewed the papers together, a strange calm washed over me. With each form signed, with each account moved, I felt my chains loosen, power of attorney revoked, accounts transferred, a new will drafted that left nothing in the hands of those who had betrayed me. My children thought they had me cornered, but in truth, I had just pulled the rug out from under their entire scheme. It felt like working against a ticking clock. They were out running errands, oblivious to the fact that while they schemed about my future, I was dismantling theirs. The more I prepared, the stronger I felt. Every signature was like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to strip away. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe freely. By the time the sun set that evening, the pieces were in place. They believed I was helpless, yet I had quietly shifted everything out of their reach. The irony made me smile. They thought they were so clever, so calculated, but they never stopped to imagine that I might see through them, or that I might fight back. The first shocking twist of this story is simple: the money, the power, the choices, they no longer belong to them. They belong to me, as they always should have. And soon, they would discover just how completely the game had changed. Because the stage was already set, their move was coming next. And when they finally confronted me with their grand plan, they would have no idea they were walking straight into mine. The day finally came when their plan unfolded in the open. I could see it in the way they smiled too wide, the way their voices carried a brittle cheerfulness that didn't match their eyes. They asked me to sit in the living room, said they needed to talk. My hands rested calmly in my lap, though inside, I felt the drumbeat of the moment I had been waiting for. They spoke carefully, like people handling fragile glass. Except the fragility they were talking about wasn't theirs, it was supposed to be mine. They framed it as concern, as love, painting pictures of places where I could be comfortable, surrounded by others my age, with doctors nearby. They said it would be better for me, safer, easier. But beneath the polished words was the truth I already knew: they wanted me gone, tucked away where I could no longer stand in the way of their plans. I nodded gently, as though I were considering their suggestion. I let them think their words were sinking in. I even allowed my eyes to mist, as though I were too overwhelmed to argue. Inside, though, I was steady as stone. I wanted them to believe they had won, if only for a moment. When they began to mention finances, how someone would need to manage things, how complicated accounts and bills could become at my age, I felt the air tighten around us. They thought they were walking me into a corner, pressing me into submission. What they didn't realize was that the corner they imagined didn't exist anymore. I leaned back, folded my hands, and let a silence stretch just long enough to unsettle them. Then I spoke, slowly, with the kind of calm that only comes from certainty. I told them that while they had been running errands, I had been busy too. That while they had been plotting to move me out, I had been moving things too, things they could never touch again. The color drained from their faces as I explained. The accounts they thought they controlled were already gone, transferred to a place they couldn't reach. The power of attorney they counted on had been revoked. The will they assumed favored them had been rewritten. Their voices faltered. Their protests stumbled over each other. But I didn't flinch. I had waited too long to say these words, and they tasted like freedom. For months, they had looked at me as though I were helpless, someone to be managed, someone too naive to see the game being played. But in that moment, I watched their confidence unravel. The tables had turned, and they were the ones scrambling, searching for a foothold where there was none. The second twist was the hardest blow. Not only had I taken back control, but I had also set things in motion that they could not undo. Legal papers signed, protections in place, proof of their actions quietly gathered. They thought they held the upper hand, but the truth was, they had never had it at all. I could see the outrage, the panic, flicker in their eyes, and in that silence, I felt something powerful settle inside me, triumph, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. They had tried to write me out of my own life. Instead, I had written a new ending, one they never saw coming. That night, as they sat stunned in the wreckage of their failed plan, I knew the real fallout was only beginning. The confrontation had been mine, but the consequences, the justice they would face those on their own. In the days that followed, the weight of truth began pressing down on them, heavier than they could carry. Their voices, once sharp with authority, grew quiet and desperate. The anger that had fueled their scheme dissolved into panic when they realized the power they thought they had was gone. They tried to reason with me at first, slipping back into the language of concern. They pleaded that I had misunderstood, that everything they did was only to protect me, but it was too late. Their words rang hollow because I had seen the evidence of their intentions with my own eyes and heard the calculations in their own voices. There was no way to dress it up as love. As the paperwork moved forward, the consequences tightened around them like a net. The house they assumed would always be theirs to live in was no longer safe ground. The money they had quietly counted on had slipped through their fingers. Calls from lawyers began replacing the cheerful outings they once bragged about. They had spent months building their plan like a sandcastle, and with one wave, it all collapsed. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light spill across the floor, feeling a peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't joy in their suffering. I didn't want to see my own children broken. It was something deeper justice. For the first time, I knew they would finally have to face the weight of their choices. Neighbors started noticing too. Whispers traveled faster than truth, and soon people began to look at them differently. The facade of the perfect family slipped, and the community they had once impressed now raised eyebrows and questions. They couldn't hide behind polite smiles anymore. And me, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet again. I wasn't just surviving, I was reclaiming. The silence they had used to trap me, the isolation they tried to impose, no longer held power. I reached out to old friends, rejoined circles they had cut me off from, and found myself welcomed back with open arms. Their downfall wasn't just about finances or legal losses, it was about exposure. Everyone could finally see what I had seen for too long. And though it hurt to accept the truth of their betrayal, There was comfort in knowing I had not been powerless after all. Justice had found its way, quietly but firmly. And as I looked ahead, I knew this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I would decide what love, dignity, and freedom looked like on my own terms. When I look back now, what strikes me most isn't the betrayal itself. It's how long I let myself believe I was powerless. For years, I confused silence with peace and sacrifice with love. I thought that if I kept giving, if I kept putting everyone else first, the loyalty and respect I had shown would eventually come back to me. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who take advantage of our devotion. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that kindness without boundaries can become an open door for manipulation. It doesn't matter if you're 70 or 17 when you stop protecting your own dignity. Someone will eventually decide they have the right to take it. That's not bitterness speaking. That's reality. And the truth is, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect, one that teaches others how to treat us. I used to think strength meant holding the family together at all costs. But I've come to realize that real strength is knowing when to let go, when to stand up, and when to draw a line. It's not about screaming or fighting. It's about calmly reclaiming your voice when someone tries to silence it. In the end, that's exactly what I did. And that decision changed everything. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Watching my own children's plans unravel, seeing their anger and disappointment, it cut deep. But what hurt more was the idea of living the rest of my life as a shadow of myself, controlled and diminished by those I had raised. I couldn't let that be my story. I had given too much, loved too hard, and endured too long to hand over my final years to betrayal. Instead, I found a different ending, one filled with freedom, with choices made on my own terms, with friendships and passions I had pushed aside for far too long. The betrayal became my turning point, the moment I realized that even late in life, I still held the pen in my own hand. I could still write a new chapter. If there's one message I hope you carry with you from my story, it's this: never let anyone convince you that your worth has expired or that your voice no longer matters. No matter your age, no matter your circumstances, you deserve respect. And if someone tries to take that from you, know that you have every right to protect yourself, to fight back, and to choose a different path. I hope my journey reminds you that resilience doesn't mean being unbroken. It means refusing to stay broken. And maybe, just maybe, it inspires you to take a look at your own life and ask, where do I need to reclaim my power? Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced something similar, I would love for you to share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because every story, even the painful ones, can help light the way for someone else.